You know how people say weddings bring out the best in families? Well, not always. For me, my son's big day ended up being the stage for one of the most humiliating moments of my life. I raised my son alone after his father passed away. Back then, we lived in a modest two-bedroom house in Dayton, Ohio. I worked two jobs, sometimes three. I was the mom who packed his lunches at 4 a.m., ironed his shirts while half asleep, and fought with bill collectors just so I could keep the lights on and his future bright. Vacations? Never. Shopping sprees? Forget it. Every penny went to him, to making sure he had the opportunities one never did. And it worked. He got into one of the best private schools in the state, then built a name for himself in business circles in New York. Watching him succeed was my greatest reward. Or at least it used to be. Somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me as the mom who sacrificed everything. Instead, he started seeing me as an embarrassment, someone who didn't fit into his polished, champagne and caviar lifestyle. I was the uncool mom who didn't belong at his country club dinners or networking galas. Still, when his wedding came around, a massive event with 280 guests at a ballroom in Manhattan, I told myself I'd swallow the hurt. I wasn't there for me. I was there for him. I sat quietly, dressed in the best gown I could afford, watching him glow with his bride under the chandeliers. But then came the speeches. When he took the microphone, I expected something sweet. Maybe a thank you. Maybe even a small nod to all the years I carried him on my back. But instead, in front of nearly 300 guests, he laughed, and with a cruel smile, he called me a failure. He said I was a burden he had to rise above. A poor excuse of a parent. The room went quiet except for his chuckles. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My hands shook under the tablecloth. I wanted to cry, scream, run. Anything but sit frozen as my son humiliated me on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. And yet, I didn't move. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Because deep down, I knew something nobody else in that room knew. I had been carrying a secret for years. A secret worth $44 million. And in that moment, while his voice dripped with arrogance, I decided I wasn't going to carry it quietly anymore. This is the story of how my son tried to break me in front of the world, and how I broke him back without even raising my voice. Before I dive deeper, I just want to say, stories like this take countless hours to write, edit, and share. If you enjoy them, please consider subscribing. It's a small click for you, but it means the world to me and helps me keep bringing these stories to life. Now, let's go back to where it all began. If you were sitting in that ballroom, watching your only child humiliate you in front of hundreds, what would you have done? Would you walk away quietly or stay and fight? Let me know in the comments. When I was 24, I became a widow. My husband, David, collapsed suddenly at work in Dayton, Ohio. A heart attack, the doctors said. He was only 26. One moment we were talking about finally taking a trip to Lake Erie that summer, and the next, I was standing in Miami Valley Hospital, staring at his lifeless body, clutching our 3-year-old son, Ethan, to my chest. Grief is supposed to come in stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. For me, it all came at once. But I didn't have the luxury of drowning in it. Ethan needed me. So, I buried my pain, rolled up my sleeves, and worked. I picked up shifts wherever I could, daycare aide by morning, diner waitress by night, sometimes cleaning offices in downtown Dayton in between. My hands were blistered, my back ached, and there were nights I fell asleep on the couch still in my uniform. But Ethan never knew. To him, childhood was library visits, bedtime stories, and birthday cakes made from scratch even when money was tight. We lived small but with love. That little 2-bedroom house on Linden Avenue wasn't much, but I kept it spotless. I painted the kitchen myself when the walls yellowed, planted marigolds in coffee cans, and made it feel like a home. Every penny I saved went to him: private school tuition, summer camps, music lessons. When the other kids had the newest Nikes, I couldn't compete. But Ethan never went without opportunity. And for years, I thought he saw that. I still remember his face when he got his acceptance letter to Columbia University in New York City. He ran through the house shouting, waving the letter above his head like he had just won the lottery. He hugged me so tight I could hardly breathe. "Mom, we did it," he said. "We actually did it." We. That word meant everything to me. I thought he understood. I sold my wedding ring to help pay for his dorm deposit. I borrowed money from friends to cover travel expenses for orientation. Watching him walk across the Columbia campus in Manhattan, with its towering stone buildings and bustling students, was one of the proudest moments of my life. I cried the whole Amtrak ride back to Ohio. But something changed after that. At first, it was subtle. Calls grew shorter. Holidays became too busy. Summers, he stayed in New York instead of coming home. His voice carried a new edge when he talked to me, as if my questions were childish, my advice outdated. Then came the first real sting. He introduced me to his friends over Christmas break one year, and when I mentioned working double shifts to pay for his tuition, he laughed it off. "She's exaggerating," he said, brushing it away like lint on a suit. I remember the embarrassed look on his friends' faces, the way they avoided eye contact. That was the moment I realized he wasn't proud of where he came from anymore. He was ashamed. As his career in finance took off in New York, first with an internship on Wall Street, then a job at a high-powered firm, his visits home dwindled. Dayton became a ghost of his past, one he rarely acknowledged. He invited me to his new apartment once, a sleek place in Tribeca with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson. I brought him a quilt I had sewn myself, thinking it might give his space a touch of home. He stuffed it in a closet, muttering something about aesthetic. I stayed quiet. I told myself it was just a phase. Young men can be arrogant. Success can blur their vision. Deep down, he was still my boy. The boy I'd rocked to sleep during thunderstorms, the boy who cried when his goldfish died, the boy who once told me he wanted to be just like his dad. But the distance only grew. By the time he announced his engagement, Ethan was fully embedded in a world of wealth and appearances. His fiancée, Rebecca, came from old money in Connecticut. Her family lived in a sprawling estate in Greenwich, with tennis courts and a butler who greeted me at the door during our first meeting. I showed up in my best dress from Macy's. Rebecca's mother looked me up and down and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I wasn't stupid. I could feel it, the unspoken judgment, the whispered question. How did someone like you end up raising him? Still, I kept my head high. I thought, this is his happiness. Don't ruin it. But behind the polite smiles, I saw the way Ethan's shoulders stiffened whenever I spoke. How he avoided mentioning my work, my life in Dayton. How he quickly changed the subject if I brought up his childhood. It was as if he had scrubbed me from his story, erasing the years of sacrifice and painting himself as a self-made man. I swallowed the hurt. Again. And then came the wedding. 280 guests in a Manhattan ballroom, glittering with chandeliers, champagne towers, and a string quartet playing Bach. It was breathtaking, the kind of wedding you see in glossy magazines. I sat near the back, away from the spotlight, just happy to see my son standing at the altar, glowing with love and success. I told myself that was enough, that my place didn't matter as long as he was happy. But as I watched him take the microphone for the speeches, I felt a pit in my stomach. Something in his eyes, a flicker of arrogance, told me he wasn't about to honor his mother. And when the words left his mouth, calling me a failure, a burden, a poor excuse for a parent, something inside me snapped. Not outwardly, not in anger, but quietly deep in my soul. Because Ethan didn't know one thing. The one thing I had been holding on to all these years. David hadn't just left me grief when he died. He had also left me something else. Something I had never told Ethan about. Something worth $44 million. And as I sat there, hands trembling, I realized the time for silence was over. The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel shimmered like a cathedral built to worship wealth. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung overhead, casting golden light across polished marble floors. Everywhere I looked, there were sequins, tuxedos, champagne flutes clinking against each other in laughter. I sat at a round table near the back, surrounded by strangers, guests from Rebecca's side, I assumed. They were polite enough, offering me small smiles, but I knew the truth. To them, I wasn't the proud mother of the groom. I was just the woman who didn't belong. The band quieted and the wedding planner, a sleek woman in a black headset, strode to the center of the room. She announced the start of the speeches. I clapped softly, bracing myself for the flood of toasts and jokes. The maid of honor spoke first, Rebecca's sister, her voice warm and teasing. People laughed. Glasses clinked. Then came the best man, Ethan's college roommate, who filled his speech with stories of late-night study sessions and wild parties in New York. Again, laughter rolled across the room. And then it was Ethan's turn. My son, my pride, my life's work. He stood tall in his tuxedo, microphone in hand, grinning as if he owned the room. The applause swelled. Rebecca gazed up at him, her eyes shining. For a moment, my heart swelled too. I thought, this is it. This is where he'll say something kind. Something for me. But what came out of his mouth shredded me instead. I want to thank everyone here tonight, he began, voice confident. I wouldn't be standing here without the support of so many amazing people, friends, mentors, colleagues, and of course my beautiful wife. Applause again. Then his tone shifted. You know, people often ask me how I got here, how I managed to rise above, to build a life for myself. And the truth is, he paused, his grin sharpening into something cruel. It wasn't easy, especially with the kind of example I grew up with. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. My mother, he continued, nodding vaguely toward me, did her best, I guess. But let's be real, her best wasn't much. She never had a career, never had stability. She was always struggling, always scraping by. If anything, I had to overcome her failures just to make something of myself. The room went silent. Forks froze midair. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably beside him, whispering something he ignored. I felt heat crawl up my neck. My vision blurred. And sure, he said with a chuckle, she kept a roof over my head, but it wasn't the kind of roof I wanted to stay under. Growing up, I used to lie awake at night telling myself, one day I'll escape this. One day, I'll never live like her. And I'm proud to say I kept that promise. Laughter, not from everyone, but from enough people that it echoed like gunfire in my ears. I sat frozen, my hands trembling in my lap, nails digging into my palm. I wanted to stand, to scream, to tell them all the truth, that I had bled myself dry for him, that he wouldn't be standing there in a $10,000 tuxedo if it weren't for me. But I didn't. I stayed silent, because in that moment, I remembered something I had locked away for years, a secret, the truth about David, about what he left behind when he died. And suddenly, the humiliation didn't matter. The whispers, the stares, the smug grin on Ethan's face, they all blurred into background noise. Because I realized I had the power to burn every single one of his words to ash. He thought I was poor. He thought I was nothing. But he didn't know. He didn't know about the $44 million. The speech dragged on, though I hardly heard it. My mind was a storm. I saw images of the past, of me working double shifts, of me selling my ring to pay for his dorm, of him hugging me and saying, "We did it, Mom." And now here he was, erasing it all in front of hundreds of people, spitting on the very foundation of his success. When the applause finally ended, I stood. My chair scraped loudly against the marble floor, drawing eyes to me. I walked slowly toward the podium, my heels clicking in rhythm with my racing heartbeat. Ethan looked startled, as if he hadn't expected me to move. Rebecca reached for his arm, whispering again, but he shrugged her off. "Mom," he said, a nervous laugh in his voice. "What are you doing?" I took the microphone from his hand. My fingers no longer shook. For the first time all night, the room was completely, utterly still. And with every pair of eyes on me, I smiled. A small, calm smile. The kind that says, you think you know me, but you don't. Common engagement. If your own child stood on a stage and humiliated you in front of hundreds, would you stay silent? Or would you take the mic like I did? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. The microphone was warm in my hand, though my voice came out cool, steady, like still water hiding a deep current. For a heartbeat, I just stood there in silence, letting the weight of the room press down. Hundreds of faces stared at me, some curious, some uneasy, others whispering into their champagne glasses, as if gossiping might shield them from the tension choking the air. Ethan shifted beside me, his hand reaching for the mic again. but I turned slightly, just enough to keep him at bay. His jaw tightened. He wasn't used to me holding the floor. For years, he had spoken over me, brushed aside my words, treated my sacrifices as nothing more than background noise to his grand story. But not tonight. Not anymore. I cleared my throat softly, leaning toward the mic. "Thank you, Ethan," I said, my tone even, almost gentle. "I didn't expect such honesty in your speech." A ripple of nervous laughter broke through the crowd. Some guests thought I was joking. Others knew by the sharp edge beneath my words that I was not. I let the pause linger before continuing. "It's true, I never had wealth. I never lived in luxury. I worked the kinds of jobs most of you wouldn't notice if you walked right past. Waitress, cleaner, teacher's aide. I spent nights scrubbing floors and mornings packing lunches, not because I dreamed of it, but because someone had to keep the lights on." I glanced at Ethan. His face was flushed now, his polished confidence faltering. "And yes," I said, voice firmer, "I struggled. But I never once considered that struggle a failure. Every long hour, every unpaid bill, every tear I cried in silence, it was all for one purpose: to give my son a life I never had. To give you," I said, turning my eyes on him, "every opportunity in this world." The silence was heavy. Somewhere near the front, I heard someone sniffle. Maybe sympathy, maybe shame. "I never asked for applause," I continued, my voice softer again. "I never asked for recognition, but I did hope for gratitude, for respect. Just a little." Ethan opened his mouth, perhaps to cut me off, but I pressed forward, my words sharper than any interruption could be. "And yet tonight, in this beautiful room filled with chandeliers and champagne, my only child stood before me and told the world I was his greatest burden, that I was his failure to overcome." A murmur swept through the tables. Rebecca had gone pale. Her parents were stone-faced, lips pressed thin, eyes darting between me and Ethan as if trying to decide whether to intervene. I took a breath, forcing a small, calm smile. "The thing is, my son doesn't know the whole story. He doesn't know the truth of what I've carried all these years." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Mom, don't." But I raised my hand, silencing him with nothing more than a look. For the first time in his life, he seemed to feel the weight of my authority. "You see," I said slowly, "when his father passed away, he didn't just leave me grief. He left me something else. Something I've kept hidden, locked away, for reasons I thought were best. I wanted my son to grow on his own. I wanted him to understand the value of work, the meaning of sacrifice, the strength that comes from struggle. But maybe I was wrong to keep it from him. Maybe I was wrong to protect him from the truth." My voice had dropped to a near whisper, but in that hushed ballroom, it carried like thunder. Every eye was on me now, every breath held. "Because the truth," I said, straightening, "is that I am not the failure he painted me to be. And I am certainly not poor." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Ethan's face drained of color. I leaned closer to the microphone, my lips curling into a smile so subtle only those in the front rows would catch it. "The truth, Ethan, is that I am worth $44 million, and I have been for years." The ballroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, even a few stunned laughs filled the air. Rebecca's mother dropped her glass, the crystal shattering against the marble floor. Cameras flashed as guests instinctively pulled out their phones, desperate to capture the scandal unraveling before their eyes. Ethan just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish yanked from water. I let the chaos swirl for a moment before I set the microphone gently on the podium. My hands no longer trembled. My knees were steady. My heart was calm. I looked at my son one last time, his face twisted in disbelief, shame, and fear all at once. Then I stepped down from the stage, leaving him standing there, exposed, stripped bare before the very people he had tried to impress. And as I walked back toward my table, a thought burned in my mind. This was only the beginning. If he thought my silence had made me weak, he was about to learn just how dangerous it could be when a quiet woman finally choked. When I left the podium, I didn't return to my table. I couldn't. The air in the ballroom was too thick, heavy with whispers and stares. Everywhere I turned, I saw lips moving, eyes darting, hands covering mouths in disbelief. They weren't whispering about Ethan anymore. They were whispering about me. I slipped out through a side door, the echo of my heels swallowed by the long hallway. The noise of the reception dulled behind me, muffled like a storm heard through thick walls. I found an empty corridor lined with portraits of old New York socialites and leaned against the cool marble, finally letting my breath escape in a trembling exhale. I had done it. For the first time in my life, I had spoken a truth I'd carried alone for over 2 decades. $44 million. The number rang in my head, absurd even to me, though I had lived with it quietly since David's death. The truth was, David hadn't just been a simple office worker. That's the story I'd let Ethan believe, because it was easier. Because the alternative was too complicated, too heavy for a child. But in reality, David had inherited stakes in a chain of manufacturing companies based in Cleveland. He never flaunted it, never lived like money was endless. But after his death, when the lawyers called me into that sterile office with its glass walls and oak table, they laid out the numbers. $44 million. I remember sitting there, Ethan curled in my lap, coloring with crayons while men in suits explained trusts and dividends and shares. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the chair to steady myself. "Mrs. Thompson," the lawyer had said, his voice calm and rehearsed, "your husband set this up to provide for you and your son. You will never need to work again if you don't wish to." I had laughed and cried. Not tears of joy, but of fear. Because I knew what money like that could do. I had seen families torn apart over far less. Siblings who stopped speaking over a few $1,000s. Parents pitting children against one another for scraps of inheritance. And Ethan was just 3 years old. What would millions do to him? Would it rob him of ambition? Strip him of empathy? Would he grow entitled, arrogant, cruel? So I made a choice. I locked it away. I lived modestly, worked jobs, paid bills late, stretched every dollar until it screamed. I wanted Ethan to know hunger, not in his stomach, but in his spirit, the hunger to push, to strive, to earn. I believed that by hiding the fortune, I was protecting him, giving him a chance to become a man who valued more than money. But standing in that ballroom tonight, hearing him laugh as he called me a burden, I realized I had failed. Not because I hid the money, but because even without it, he had grown into the very man I feared he would be. Entitled, arrogant, ashamed of the mother who gave him everything. I pressed my palms against the cool marble wall, closing my eyes as a bitter truth settled in me. Silence hadn't protected him. It had only protected my hope. My fantasy that he would grow into the kind of man his father had been, kind, humble, grateful. The silence was over now. I thought back to David's last words, spoken in the hospital just days before his heart gave out. His voice was weak, but I'll never forget it. Take care of him. Make him good. I had taken care of Ethan. But had I made him good? Or had my silence allowed him to drift so far from the man his father dreamed he'd be? My throat tightened. For years, I had imagined this fortune as a safety net, something that would reveal itself when the time was right, when Ethan had proven himself ready to handle it. But tonight, I realized something else. It wasn't a safety net. It was a weapon. And for the first time, I felt the sharp edge of it in my hand. A burst of laughter echoed faintly from the ballroom, pulling me back to the present. I straightened, brushing invisible wrinkles from my gown. I could have left then, slipped out into the New York night, hailed a cab back to my hotel, and disappeared into the anonymity of the city. But something in me refused. No, this wasn't over. This wasn't just about humiliation, or money, or even Ethan's cruelty. This was about taking back every shred of dignity I had swallowed in silence. This was about teaching my son, in front of the very people he sought to impress, that the woman he mocked was stronger, smarter, and far more powerful than he ever imagined. I began to walk back toward the ballroom, each step steadier than the last. For years, I had been the quiet mother in the shadows, content to let him shine. But shadows have a way of remembering. And tonight, mine had teeth. I paused just outside the door, listening to the muffled sound of voices inside. My hands no longer shook. My heart no longer raced. Instead, a cold clarity filled me, sharp as glass. I knew what I had to do. The silence I carried was gone. Now it was time to speak, not with words alone, but with actions. Actions that would burn away the mask Ethan wore and show the world who he truly was. And as I stood there preparing to step back into the storm, a strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe the story of how a mother finally stopped being silent, could help someone else too. Maybe there's someone out there right now, biting their tongue, swallowing their pride, convinced that keeping quiet is the only way to keep peace. If that's you, hear me. It takes courage to speak, but it takes even more courage to act. It takes me days, sometimes weeks, to pour out a story like this, to sift through old wounds and turn them into words. If you're still reading, if my silence and my breaking of it means something to you, please consider supporting me by subscribing. It's a small gesture, but it keeps me going, helps me bring these moments, these truths, to light. Because this story, it's only beginning. I square my shoulders, reach for the door handle, and whisper to myself, let's see how he handles the truth. Then I push the door open. When I pushed open the door and stepped back into the ballroom, the noise dropped instantly, as if someone had pressed mute on the whole scene. Every head turned. Champagne glasses hovered in midair. The string quartet faltered for half a beat before recovering with a trembling note. Ethan was still standing at the podium, his face pale, his jaw clenched tight. Rebecca hovered near him, whispering frantically in his ear, but he didn't move. He was frozen, a man who had built his castle on sand and now felt the tide rising. I walked past the rows of tables, not hurriedly, not with shame, but with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who knows she owns the ground beneath her feet. People parted as I approached my seat, murmuring in low voices, eyes darting between me and my son like spectators waiting for the next round of a fight. I sat down, smoothed the folds of my gown, and lifted my glass of water. My hands were steady now, steadier than they had been in years. For the rest of the evening, I said nothing more. I didn't need to. The seed had been planted. My silence was no longer submission, it was power. Ethan stumbled through the rest of the reception. His jokes landed flat. His smile looked strained. When he tried to approach me at one point, Rebecca tugged him back, her face flushed with embarrassment. I could see the calculation in her parents' eyes from across the room. They weren't thinking of vows or romance anymore. They were thinking of alliances, inheritances, and the sudden revelation that the woman they had dismissed as unworthy might be sitting on a fortune greater than theirs. I let them stew in it, but I wasn't done. Not even close. The next morning, while the newlyweds were still basking in the afterglow of their lavish celebration, I began my quiet strike. I woke in my modest hotel room on the Upper West Side, the morning sun slipping through the curtains. The city outside was already humming, horns blaring, footsteps pounding the pavement, life moving at its usual relentless pace. I brewed myself a weak cup of coffee from the machine by the bed and sat with my laptop, opening an email draft that had been years in the making, though I hadn't known it until now. The first was to the Alumni Association at Columbia University. Ethan had been bragging for years about his generous donations, how he single-handedly funded scholarships and programs. But I knew the truth. The checks he sent were always smaller than the ones he claimed. He liked to pad the numbers when telling stories at dinner parties, puffing up his ego by exaggerating his own generosity. I attached copies of receipts I had quietly saved, proof of the lies, and sent them off. The second email went to a journalist I knew in Dayton. We had gone to high school together, and she'd built a career writing for one of Ohio's larger newspapers. I didn't spill everything, not yet, but I offered a tantalizing hint. You might want to look into the real story behind Ethan Thompson, the so-called self-made millionaire. His wedding speech last night might not be the legacy he wanted. I signed it simply an observer. And finally, I logged into my private account, a quiet little profile on social media I kept under a different name. I uploaded a photo of David, Ethan's father, standing in front of one of the factories he partly owned in Cleveland. The caption read, "Some men build quietly with humility. Others take the credit and call themselves self-made." I didn't tag Ethan, didn't mention his name, but I didn't need to. The internet has a way of connecting dots, especially when there are hungry eyes looking for drama. I closed the laptop and leaned back, my coffee cooling untouched beside me. The first stones had been cast. Small, almost invisible, but I knew how ripples spread. By the time I checked out of the hotel, whispers were already moving online. Someone had recorded Ethan's wedding speech and uploaded it. The video was gaining traction on TikTok and Instagram. Clips of his smug grin and cutting words replayed over and over with captions like, "Imagine calling your mom a failure at your own wedding." By the time I boarded the Amtrak back to Ohio, the comment section was a storm. People were outraged. Some defended him, of course, but most tore him apart. Strangers called him ungrateful, heartless, arrogant. Some even tagged his workplace, asking if that's the kind of man they employed. I watched it all unfold from my phone, my lips curling into the faintest smile. I hadn't spoken another word since my quiet revelation, yet the world was already speaking for me. Back in Dayton, I returned to my little house on Linden Avenue. The marigolds I'd planted in old coffee cans were still blooming out front, their orange heads bright against the peeling paint of the porch. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. It wasn't a mansion in Tribeca, but it was mine. It had always been mine. I placed my suitcase by the door and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the faded linoleum. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small in this space. I felt steady, rooted. The silence I had carried was gone, and in its place was something far more dangerous: resolve. The call started 2 days later. First, Rebecca. Her voice was strained, brittle. "Mrs. Thompson, hi, it's Rebecca. I wanted to talk. Maybe clear some things up?" I almost laughed at her nervous politeness. Before the wedding, she had barely concealed her disdain, treating me like an inconvenient obligation. Now, her tone was syrupy sweet, as if she suddenly realized I wasn't the powerless widow she thought. I told her I was busy and hung up. Then Ethan called. 3 times. I let them all go to voicemail. His messages grew increasingly desperate. "Mom, what the hell was that at the wedding? You're making me look bad. Please, just call me back. We can fix this." Fix this? As if my dignity was something broken, something in need of repair, rather than something he had tried to shatter. I didn't return his calls. I didn't need to. The quiet revenge had already begun its work. Because here's the thing about silence: it can be weakness, yes, but when wielded carefully, strategically, it can also be a weapon sharper than any blade. And mine was only just beginning to cut. And as I sat there in my little kitchen, phone buzzing with unanswered calls, I realized something chillingly satisfying. For the first time in years, Ethan was the one scrambling. The first real blow landed on a Tuesday morning. I was at the grocery store in Dayton, pushing a squeaky cart past the cereal aisle, when my phone buzzed with a news alert. Wall Street rising star under fire after viral wedding speech. I nearly laughed right there between the Frosted Flakes and Cheerios. I opened the article, and sure enough, there was Ethan's face, smiling confidently in his tuxedo, frozen in the exact moment before he tore me apart in front of hundreds of people. The article recounted his words, quoted lines like, "My mother was a burden I had to rise above." Then it cut to the fallout. Thousands of comments condemning him. Hashtags spreading like wildfire. Even a few think pieces about the arrogance of self-made men who conveniently forget the shoulders they climbed on. I scrolled through the comments. "Imagine humiliating the woman who gave you life. Couldn't be me. This guy is the poster child for ungrateful rich kids. Somebody check if his mom's okay. She deserves better." For years, Ethan had worked tirelessly to craft his image: the polished businessman, the self-made man, the golden boy of Wall Street. But now, that image had cracks. Big ones. I tossed a box of oatmeal into my cart and kept scrolling. Another headline caught my eye. Thompson firm declines comment on employee scandal. I blinked. They already called it a scandal. Not just gossip, not just drama, scandal. By the time I got home and unpacked the groceries, my voicemail was full again. Ethan had called 6 times. His messages were a storm of anger and panic. "Mom, you have to take this video down. Do you know what it's doing to me? People at the firm are talking. This isn't funny anymore. You don't understand. This could ruin everything for me." I sat at my kitchen table, listening to his voice crack with desperation, and felt something I hadn't in years: power. Not because I had humiliated him, though part of me savored that, but because for once he was the one who needed me. And I wasn't done. The Columbia Alumni Association responded to my email within the week. They thanked me for the documentation, assured me they took integrity seriously. A week later, they issued a statement to their newsletter. Recent claims about significant philanthropic contributions from alumnus Ethan Thompson do not align with verified records. We value transparency. In other words, Ethan's bragging had caught up to him, and now it was public. The whispers online grew louder, so he lied about his donations too. Ungrateful and dishonest. What a combo. This guy's career is over. But the harshest blow came from within his own new family. Rebecca called me again one evening, her voice brittle. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, her words clipped, "I think we should meet. In person." I nearly declined, but something in her tone made me curious. I agreed. We met in a cafe in Midtown Manhattan, halfway between her office and the hotel I was staying at. She arrived in a tailored suit, hair pulled back, makeup immaculate. But her eyes told a different story. They were tired, strained. "Let me be blunt," she said as soon as we sat her down. "Your son's behavior is unacceptable. What he said to you, what he did in front of all those people, I won't defend it." Her candor surprised me. "But you also need to understand," she continued, leaning in, "that his behavior is now my problem too. My family's reputation is on the line. We can't afford this kind of scandal." I sipped my coffee, saying nothing. She tapped her manicured nails against the table. "I don't care about the money. That's not why I married him. But my parents, they care about appearances. And Ethan, he can't stop sabotaging himself. You've seen it. You know what I'm dealing with." I tilted my head. "So why are you telling me this?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Because I think he's lying to me too. About money. About what he really has. I've found gaps in his accounts, expenses he can't explain. And after your revelation at the wedding, I'm starting to think maybe he's been hiding things from me." For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. But pity had no place in the game I was playing. "You're his wife now," I said softly. "It's your choice whether you keep looking the other way." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't respond, but the silence between us said enough. When we parted, I walked back through the streets of Manhattan with a quiet satisfaction blooming in my chest. My son had wanted a perfect marriage, a perfect image, a perfect life. But his lies were unraveling faster than he could stitch them back together. And I was helping the threads come loose. By the end of the month, Ethan was no longer the golden boy. His firm put him on administrative leave, though everyone knew what that meant. His name was poison in the alumni circles. Rebecca moved back into her parents' estate in Greenwich, citing space. And me, I watered my marigolds, brewed my coffee, and went about my days in Dayton like nothing had changed. Because for me, nothing really had. I was still the woman in the little house on Linden Avenue. Still the mother who had worked herself raw to raise a boy who spat on her name. The only difference was that now, the world finally saw him the way I did. But even as I sat on my porch, watching the sun set over the quiet Ohio streets, I knew this was just the beginning. Ethan wasn't going to take his downfall quietly. He would come to me, he would beg, plead, demand. And when he did, I would be ready. Because I had been silent for too long. And once you learn how to use silence as a weapon, there's no putting it down. The knock came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was in the kitchen stirring a pot of chicken soup, the smell of onions and thyme filling the house, when I heard it, 3 sharp raps on the front door. I froze, spoon in midair. Something in the rhythm of that knock made my stomach twist. It wasn't the friendly, hesitant tap of a neighbor or the hurried knock of a delivery man. It was impatient, heavy, familiar. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the door. Through the screen, I saw him. Ethan. His once polished hair was damp from the rain, his tailored suit wrinkled, his tie askew. For years, he had presented himself like a magazine cover. Sharp, untouchable. But now, he looked smaller, deflated. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, his voice hoarse. "Please, can I come in?" I didn't answer right away. I let him stand there, dripping on the porch, shifting uncomfortably under my gaze. Finally, I stepped aside. Wipe your shoes first. It was petty, maybe, but there was power in it. For the first time in years, he obeyed without argument. He followed me into the kitchen, glancing around like he was seeing the house for the first time. His eyes lingered on the chipped linoleum, the faded curtains, the marigolds outside the window. He had always looked down on this house, but now his expression was something else, nostalgia, maybe even regret. I set a bowl of soup on the table. Sit. He sat. For a moment, the only sound was the rain tapping against the roof and the clink of his spoon against the bowl. He ate hungrily, like a man who hadn't had a home-cooked meal in years. Finally, he set the spoon down and rubbed his face with both hands. Mom, I messed up. I didn't respond. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Everything's falling apart. The firm, they don't want me anymore. Rebecca moved out. People won't stop calling me ungrateful online. I don't know what to do. A bitter laugh rose in my throat, but I swallowed it. You don't know what to do. I said quietly, maybe you start by not humiliating the person who gave you everything. His face crumpled. I didn't mean it like that. I was nervous. I was trying to be funny. I don't know why I said those things. Please, Mom, you've got to help me fix this. Fix this. I leaned forward, my eyes sharp. Ethan, do you even understand what you did? You didn't just embarrass me. You erased me. You stood in front of hundreds of people and told them I was nothing. And for what? To make yourself look bigger. He dropped his gaze to the table. I was wrong. I know that now. I studied him. For years, I had imagined this moment, my son humbled, apologizing, stripped of arrogance. But the reality was Messier. His apology wasn't pure. It wasn't born of love or remorse. It was born of desperation. You didn't come here because you wanted to make things right, I said slowly. You came here because you want something from me. Isn't that true? His silence was answer enough. Finally, he whispered, I need help. Financially. My accounts are frozen. I'm drowning in debt. I know you have the money. Please, Mom. Just a little. Just enough to get me back on my feet. The audacity of it nearly knocked the air from my lungs. After all the years I had hidden that fortune, after the cruel words he had thrown at me, here he was begging not for forgiveness, but for a handout. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. You know, Ethan, when your father left us that money, I thought I was protecting you by keeping it hidden. I thought if you grew up without it, you'd learn humility, gratitude, compassion. But I see now I failed. Money or no money, you still became exactly what I feared. He rose too, his voice desperate. But you can change that now. If you help me, if you give me a chance, I'll make it right. I shook my head slowly. No, Ethan. You don't get to erase what you've done with a check. You don't get to buy back respect. His face twisted, the desperation giving way to anger. So what then? You're just going to let me sink? You're going to sit here in this little house while your son's life falls apart. I met his glare without flinching. You did that to yourself. For a moment, he looked like he might explode, his fists clenching at his sides. But then his shoulders sagged, and he dropped back into the chair, burying his face in his hands. Please, he whispered. I don't know what else to do. I looked at him, the boy I had once rocked to sleep, the man who had once hugged me with pride, now reduced to a broken figure in my kitchen. My heart ached, but my resolve held firm. I can't give you money, Ethan, I said softly, but I'll give you something else. A chance to prove that you can be more than this. But you're going to have to earn it, and you're going to have to do it without me carrying you. He lifted his head, confusion flickering in his eyes. What do you mean? I didn't answer. Not yet, because the plan forming in my mind was bigger than money, bigger than revenge. It was about redemption or destruction. The choice would be his, but one way or another, he was about to learn that a mother's silence can become the loudest lesson of all. After Ethan left that rainy afternoon, the house felt heavier. The echoes of his voice lingered in the air, bouncing off the walls, and for a long while I just stood there in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair he'd occupied. Part of me wanted to collapse into tears, to let the weight of all those years of sacrifice and disappointment crush me. But another part of me, stubborn, steel-spined, refused. He had begged. He had admitted failure. He had asked for help. That was more than I had ever thought I'd see from him. But I couldn't ignore the truth. His apology was tangled in desperation. It wasn't pure, it wasn't full. And yet, there had been something in his voice. A crack. A tiny sliver of sincerity hidden under all the self-preservation. The question gnawed at me for days. Could my son be redeemed? The first gesture came a week later. I was sitting on the porch, sipping a mug of lukewarm coffee, when a car pulled up outside. Ethan stepped out, not in a suit this time, but in jeans and a plain gray hoodie. He carried a bag in one hand. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice cautious. I didn't invite him in, but I didn't send him away either. He handed me the bag. Inside were groceries, milk, eggs, bread, even a bouquet of daisies. "I thought you could use these," he said. "Just something small." I raised an eyebrow. Trying to buy my forgiveness with daisies? His cheeks flushed. "No, I wanted to do something nice. It wasn't much." A bag of groceries couldn't erase years of arrogance or a single devastating wedding speech. But it was a start. Over the next few weeks, Ethan kept showing up. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes with takeout, sometimes with nothing at all. He would sit on the porch with me, sipping coffee or lemonade, talking about nothing in particular, baseball scores, the weather, memories from his childhood. He never brought up the money again. Not once. At first, I waited for the catch, for the moment when he'd slip back into old habits and reveal that all of this was just another manipulation. But it didn't come. Instead, I started to notice small cracks in his polished exterior. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Dayton, he confessed, "I've been looking for work. No one will touch me right now. Not after everything." I even tried applying for jobs outside finance. Bartending, retail, anything. "Nobody wants me." His voice was raw, stripped of pride. For the first time in years, I didn't see the arrogant businessman. I saw the boy I had raised, the boy who once scraped his knees riding his bike, who cried when his father died, who swore he'd make me proud. Something in me softened. "I'm not asking you to fix this for me," he said quietly. I don't want to lose you too." Those words landed heavier than I expected. Because despite everything, despite the humiliation, the anger, the betrayal, he was still my son. And some part of me still wanted him to succeed. Not in business, not in money, but in life. So I gave him boundaries. "If you want me in your life," I told him one evening, "then you're going to have to earn it. No more lies. No more arrogance. You show up. You do the work. You stay humble. Otherwise, I'm done." He nodded solemnly. "I can do that." And to his credit, he tried. He started volunteering at a local food pantry in Dayton, hauling boxes, serving meals, scrubbing floors. At first, I thought it was just another attempt to polish his image. But then I saw him one Saturday afternoon, kneeling to tie the shoe of a little boy who reminded me of him at that age. There were no cameras, no audience, just a quiet moment of kindness. That was when I realized, maybe, just maybe, there was something in him worth saving. Rebecca called me once during this time, her voice sharp. "Don't let him fool you, Mrs. Thompson. He's always been good at playing the victim when it suits him." "Maybe," I replied. "Or maybe he's finally learning." She scoffed and hung up. But her skepticism only strengthened my resolve. I would give Ethan the chance to prove himself, but on my terms, not hers. Weeks turned into months. The scandal around Ethan began to quiet down, replaced by fresher gossip and newer scandals in the city. His name wasn't headline material anymore. But the damage was done. His career in finance was over. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies flicker in the twilight, he turned to me and said, "Mom, I've been thinking. I don't want to go back to that world. The money, the greed, the constant performance. It ate me alive. I want something different. What do you want?" I asked. He hesitated. "I don't know yet, but I know I don't want to be that man anymore." For the first time, I believed him. But just as I was starting to let hope take root, just as I was starting to believe redemption might be possible, the past came knocking again. Because one rainy evening, months after the wedding, I opened my mailbox to find an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it was a photograph, grainy black and white, of Ethan at a bar in Manhattan, laughing with men I didn't recognize. And scribbled in red ink across the bottom were the words, "He hasn't changed." My hands trembled as I held it. The air around me seemed to thicken. Was this a warning? A threat? Proof that Ethan was still playing games behind my back? I folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, and locked it in my desk drawer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions. Had Ethan really changed, or was I being fooled again? Who had sent the letter and why? And most importantly, what would I do if I discovered? The envelope with the photograph sat in my desk drawer for 3 days, though it might as well have been a live coal. I could feel its heat even with the drawer shut. I kept asking myself the same question. Was it a warning or was it the truth? Every time Ethan came over during those days, bringing groceries, helping in the yard, even fixing the squeaky hinge on the back door, I looked at him differently. I watched his hands, his eyes, his words, searching for cracks in the mask. And yet he seemed steady. Not perfect, not polished, but steady. There was no arrogance in his tone anymore. No smugness in his laughter. He looked tired, yes, but there was something else beneath the fatigue. Humility. Still, the photograph gnawed at me. On the 4th day, I confronted him. I set the envelope on the kitchen table, slid it across to him. He picked it up, frowning, then pulled out the photo. His face drained of color. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "It came in the mail," I replied. "No return address." He stared at it, shaking his head. This was from years ago, before the wedding. Those guys, they're traitors I used to run with. We'd go out drinking after hours. That was my life back then. But not now. Not anymore. I searched his face for a lie. Why would someone send it to me? He clenched his jaw. Because someone doesn't want me to change. Someone wants me ruined for good. Rebecca's voice echoed in my memory. Don't let him fool you. Was it her? Or someone else from his crumbling world of finance? Whoever it was, they wanted me to doubt him. And it was working. I let the silence hang between us until finally I said, "I'm not interested in your excuses, Ethan. I'm interested in your choices. If you want me to believe you've changed, then you keep showing up. Every day. No matter what anyone sends me. Because pictures fade, but actions don't." He swallowed hard, then nodded. "I'll prove it. I swear." And for once, I let myself believe him. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The world moved on. The headlines no longer screamed his name. The internet found new villains to devour. Even Rebecca stopped calling, her silence a kind of closure in itself. Ethan kept coming. Sometimes to mow the lawn, sometimes to sit on the porch, sometimes just to share a cup of coffee in silence. Slowly, cautiously, we stitched together something that resembled a relationship. Not the one we had lost, but something new, fragile, imperfect, but real. And through it all, I kept the fortune hidden. Not because I didn't trust him, though I didn't, not fully, but because I realized I didn't need to use it as leverage anymore. My silence had already done its work. The money was just money. The real inheritance I wanted to leave him wasn't in dollars or assets. It was the lesson I had fought so hard to teach him: humility, gratitude, respect. One evening, as autumn settled over Dayton and the marigolds wilted in the chill, Ethan turned to me and said, "Mom, thank you." For what? For not giving up on me, even when I deserved it. I studied him for a long moment. His eyes were clearer now, his posture softer. He was no longer the man who had stood on a ballroom stage and declared me a failure. That man was gone. In his place was someone else, someone still flawed, but learning. I reached over and patted his hand. "You're welcome. But don't thank me too much. You still have a lot to prove." He chuckled, a small, genuine laugh. Fair enough. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the kitchen, the envelope still tucked away in the drawer. I pulled it out one last time, stared at the photograph, then fed it into the flame of a candle. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. The past was the past. As the smoke drifted upward, I whispered to myself, I'm done being silent. Because that was the truth of it. Silence had been my prison for years. Silence about the money. Silence about my pain. Silence in the face of my son's cruelty. But when I finally broke it, when I finally used my voice, the entire world shifted. It wasn't the fortune that gave me power. It wasn't revenge that gave me peace. It was the act of standing up, of refusing to be erased, of reminding my son and myself that I mattered. So here I am, a woman in her late 50s, living in a small house in Dayton, sipping her coffee on a creaky porch. No chandeliers, no champagne fountains, no ballrooms dripping with wealth. But I have something far more valuable: dignity, and a son who, for the first time in years, is learning to see me not as a burden, but as a mother. If you followed me through this story, through every humiliation, every secret, every moment of pain and triumph, then I'll ask just one thing. Stories like these take hours to write, hours to relive, and they come from places in the heart most people would rather leave buried. If you found yourself in these words, if they've made you feel something, anger, hope, maybe even forgiveness, please don't just click away. Support the work. Subscribe. It's the smallest way to say your story mattered. Because in the end, that's all any of us want, isn't it? To know our stories mattered. And mine finally does. I thought burning the photograph would bring peace, but ghosts don't go quietly. The first ghost appeared in the form of a knock at my door one chilly November morning. When I opened it, a man stood there in a charcoal coat, his hair slicked back, his expression smooth in that way only businessmen and liars seem to perfect. "Mrs. Thompson?" he asked politely. "Yes." He slipped a card into my hand. "Mark Densmore, investigative reporter, The New York Times. I'd like to talk to you about your son." For a moment, I considered slamming the door. But curiosity held me still. "What about him?" He gave a small smile. "You've seen the headlines. Ethan Thompson, the disgraced Wall Street trader, the viral wedding speech. I think the public only has half the story. And I suspect you might hold the other half." My stomach tightened. Was this about the money? About David's inheritance? About everything I had fought to keep hidden? "I have nothing to say," I replied, starting to close the door. But he slid his foot into the frame, just enough to stop it. "I understand. Truly. But let me put it this way. The world thinks Ethan is a monster. If you don't speak, that's all he'll ever be. But if you tell your story, your sacrifices, your side, people might see him differently. They might see you differently too." I froze, the words digging into me. For years, I had been invisible, erased from Ethan's shiny narrative. The wedding had dragged me unwillingly into the spotlight, but only as a prop in his story. What if this was a chance to tell mine? "I'll think about it," I said finally, pushing the door closed. The reporter's business card sat on my kitchen counter for days, taunting me. I wasn't sure if speaking out would heal or destroy. Meanwhile, Ethan kept showing up. He had found part-time work at a local hardware store. Hardly glamorous, but honest. When I asked how it felt, he grinned wryly. Humbling. And that's probably what I needed. Some evenings, he'd come by covered in dust, smelling faintly of paint and sawdust. He'd sit on the porch, sip iced tea, and talk about customers he'd helped, tools he was learning to use. There was a lightness in him I hadn't seen in years. A man stripped of vanity. And yet, I couldn't forget the reporter's words. The world thinks Ethan is a monster. Because it was true. Online, the viral clip of his wedding speech still floated around, recycled every few weeks when someone needed a new villain to roast. The comments were brutal, the hashtags merciless. Ethan never mentioned it, but I saw the way his shoulders tensed whenever his phone buzzed. I saw the way he avoided social media altogether. He was living under a shadow, a ghost that followed him everywhere. One evening, as we washed dishes side by side, I asked him, "Do you ever think about telling your side? About defending yourself publicly?" He shrugged. Would anyone care? They've already decided who I am. The arrogant son who trashed his mother. End of story. His voice cracked slightly, and I realized something. Maybe redemption wasn't about convincing the world. Maybe it was about convincing himself. But still, the card on my counter burned a hole in my thoughts. One night, I picked it up and dialed the number. The reporter answered on the second ring, his voice calm, professional. "I'll tell you my story," I said. "But on one condition, you print it all. Not just Ethan. Me too." There was a pause. Then he said, "Deal." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. He interviewed me for hours, recording every word. I told him about raising Ethan alone, about working 3 jobs, about hiding the inheritance to protect him from the corrosive weight of money. I told him about the wedding, about the humiliation, about the secret message from David that silenced a ballroom. When the article was published, the headline read, "The Mother Behind the Monster, a Story of Sacrifice and Silence." I braced myself for backlash, but what came surprised me. People responded with compassion. They called me resilient, brave, selfless. They said Ethan's cruelty was unforgivable, yes, but also that maybe, just maybe, they understood how a man raised without knowing the truth might twist into something bitter. The narrative shifted. Ethan wasn't just the villain anymore. He was the fallen son of a mother who had given everything. A man whose arrogance had been met with a reckoning. And to my surprise, Ethan thanked me. "Mom," he said quietly one evening, holding the article in his hands, "I thought you'd destroy me. But you gave me a second chance." I shook my head. "I didn't give you anything. I just told the truth. What you do with it, that's on you." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll make it count." For the first time, I believed he might. But the ghost didn't stop there. Because a week later, I received another envelope. This one wasn't a photograph. It was a legal notice. Rebecca Thompson versus Ethan Thompson. Petition for divorce. Attached was a demand for spousal support, citing Ethan's hidden assets and concealed inheritance. My hand shook as I read it. She was coming for the money, the very fortune I had hidden all these years. Ethan's face went pale when I showed him. "She knows," he whispered. "Or at least she thinks she does." And in that moment I realized my silence had protected us for decades. But now, with lawyers involved, the secret couldn't stay buried forever. The question was, would revealing it save us or destroy everything I had built? The legal envelope lay on the kitchen table for hours before either of us spoke. Ethan sat across from me, his hands knotted together, staring at the bold black letters on the page. Petition for divorce. Petition for spousal support. "Mom," he whispered, "she's coming after money that doesn't even exist. Not for me, anyway." I rubbed my temples, the weight of it pressing down like a stone. "She doesn't know that. She thinks you've been hiding something. And once the lawyers start digging, it's only a matter of time before they find the truth." His eyes flicked to mine, wide and fearful. "The inheritance." I nodded. For decades, that $44 million had been our family secret. I had locked it away not because I was greedy, but because I knew what money could do. I had seen it change people, poison them, warp their sense of worth. And now, all these years later, I was watching that prophecy unfold. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "If they find out, they'll drag you through the mud. They'll say you manipulated me, that I lied to protect you. I cut in. Let them. I can live with the truth. What I can't live with is watching you crumble, because you still don't know who you are without a $sign attached to your name." He dropped his head into his hands. For a long moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the ticking of the wall clock, steady and merciless. Finally, he looked up. "So what do we do?" The question hung between us, and I realized he wasn't asking me for money this time. He wasn't asking me to fix it. He was asking me for guidance, and that, at least, I could give. "We fight," I said. "Not with lawyers, not with checks. With the truth. You stand up in that courtroom and tell them who you are. Tell them what you've done, good and bad. And I'll stand beside you because I'm not hiding anymore." He blinked at me, stunned. You'd testify?" "Yes," I said firmly. "But not for the money. For us. For dignity. For the story that's ours. Not Rebecca's, not the internet's, not anyone else's." When the day of the hearing came, the courthouse in downtown Dayton loomed heavy and gray against the sky. Reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras flashing, their voices calling Ethan's name. For the first time, I didn't shrink from them. I walked beside my son, my chin high, my heart steady. Inside, Rebecca sat at the plaintiff's table, immaculate in a navy suit, her lawyer whispering in her ear. Her eyes flicked to me and narrowed. a glint of triumph in them, as if she had already won. But as the proceedings began, something shifted. When Ethan spoke, his voice was calm, clear, stripped of arrogance. He didn't deny his failures. He admitted them. He told the judge about the man he had been, selfish, prideful, blind, and the man he was trying to become. He spoke of volunteering, of working at the hardware store, of rebuilding trust with me one grocery bag at a time. And then, when it was my turn, I told the truth. I told them about the inheritance, yes, but also about why I had hidden it. I spoke of David, of the years of struggle, of raising Ethan without a safety net, so he could learn the value of work. I spoke of silence, of humiliation, of the wedding that forced me to break it. And I spoke of dignity, not just mine, but the dignity I hoped my son would reclaim. The courtroom was silent when I finished. Even Rebecca's lawyer looked momentarily shaken. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Thompson, are you saying you have assets totaling $44 million, entirely separate from your son?" "Yes," I said evenly. "And I have no intention of giving him a cent until he proves, through his actions, that he is a man who can handle it." Gasps rippled through the room. Rebecca's face blanched. She had expected a payday, and instead she'd been handed a wall she couldn't climb. The judge ruled quickly. Rebecca's petition was denied. There were no hidden marital assets, no grounds for spousal support beyond what Ethan already earned at the hardware store. She stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clicking like gunfire against the marble floor. Ethan and I walked out together into the bright afternoon light. For the first time in months, maybe years, he looked lighter. "Mom," he said softly, "you didn't have to do that. You could have kept hiding it." I smiled faintly. Hiding never did us any good. It's the truth that set us free. He nodded slowly, the words sinking into him like seeds into soil. In the weeks that followed, the noise faded. Rebecca disappeared from the headlines. The lawsuit became yesterday's news. Ethan kept working at the hardware store, kept volunteering at the pantry, kept showing up at my house with groceries or daisies, or just a quiet smile. And me, I kept living. I watered my marigolds, brewed my coffee, and sat on my porch as the seasons turned. For the first time in years, peace wasn't a dream. It was real. The money is still there, untouched. Maybe one day I'll use it to start a scholarship in David's name, or to fund the food pantry that helped Ethan find humility. Maybe I'll leave it to Ethan if he proves, beyond a doubt, that he's truly changed. But for now, it's enough to know that silence no longer owns me. Because in the end, that's what this story has always been about. Not money, not revenge, not even redemption. It's about voice, about choosing to stand up, to speak, to claim my place in a world that once dismissed me. And as I sit here now telling you this story, I'll ask just one final thing. If you've ever felt erased, if you've ever swallowed your pain in silence, if you've ever fought to be heard, let my story remind you that your voice matters. And if my words have touched you, even a little, then don't let them vanish into the void. Support the telling. Subscribe. Share. Because stories like these take not just hours of writing, but a lifetime of living. And no life, no voice, deserves to be forgotten.